What's Underneath is a CastBox original produced in partnership with Studio 71.
CastBox is the fastest growing, highest rated podcast app on both iOS and Android, where you can find all of your favorite podcasts.
You can listen to What's Underneath wherever you get your podcasts, but we hope you'll give CastBox a shot and see for yourself.
Hello and welcome to What's Underneath,
the podcast that will inspire radical self-acceptance through empowering you to embrace what's unrepeatable in you.
I'm Lily Mandelbaum, and sitting next to me is my mom, Elisa Goodkind.
And we are StyleLikeU. In our new podcast, we are going to expand the types of intimate, unfiltered conversations we've been having in our viral video series, the What's Underneath Project.
Each week, we will interview diverse nonconformists about their relationship to style, self-image, and identity.
Being radically honest without shame and holding that honesty with compassion is self-acceptance. So Lily, what are we doing in the suburbs of Philadelphia?
We're in the suburbs of Philadelphia interviewing Alex Auder. Is that how you say it?
It is. Good job. You're going to get in big trouble, I'm just telling you, from Philadelphians for calling Mount Airy the suburbs. It's technically the city of Philadelphia. No, I thought that was going to be good to be on the show.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Okay. Alex is a yoga teacher and an actress who I discovered earlier this year when I saw an episode of one of my favorite TV shows, High Maintenance. I just thought she really embodied everything that we stand for at StyleLikeU, which is her performance was so lacking in self-consciousness and was so shame-free in what she was doing as an actress. And I feel like for us, we think about self-acceptance as like the absence of shame, being unself-conscious in who you are and kind of owning everything about who you are and then expressing that through your outer appearance, and we are intoxicated by people who do that. And so the minute I saw Alex, I was like, oh my God, must know this woman. And now we've been here for about 30 minutes chatting as we've been setting up, and I am very happy that I followed my intuition on this because she is totally incredible. And it was the beginning. I just started taking acting classes for the first time in the last few months, and it's been my biggest fear my whole life because I'm working through a lot of getting over caring what people think and being judged. And
that's so great that you're doing that.
Thank you.
I'm so beyond flattered. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so it's cool to, I'm sure you inspired me in some way even.
That's so great. It was really Ben Sinclair, who's the guy on High Maintenance, and Katya, they really have the amazing way to just recognize exactly what you're describing in someone, whether it's all those qualities you just described or something else. But they kind of knew that about me and Gaby, because we know them sort of all together, my sister, from going to these fashion shows, actually, Rachel Comey shows. And Gaby and I would often sort of create a dance party at the end, because she does more dinner party event shows, not really catwalk. And I guess Ben and Katya later said that they would watch us dancing and were attracted to that, and that is kind of this thing that Gaby and I both have for whatever reason. We don't really know exactly why, but is that very comfortable in our bodies, and we're attracted to other people like that, and also attracted to getting people who aren't feeling like that to get on board with us, So dance parties with us can be fun. Yeah.
So wait, I can't let it go that there's what is the reason that you both are like that? It's a very important subject these days and very important to us and to what we do.
So often a child whose parents are a little more needy, or I'm going to say this all in sweet ways, not to, upset my mom before she passes. I'm having internal jokes with my mother right now. Yeah. It's hard for the child to express needs, because they're pleasers and they're kind of taking care of the adults. So for example, my dad was a heroin addict. He doesn't mind me saying that. Hi, Dad. And he was very functioning, level heroin addict. He didn't shoot up. He smoked it, and he's made a lot of art about it, so not revealing any too intimate secrets. But I would often let him do his thing, even though I didn't understand what he was doing, I didn't know at that age he's snorting heroin, but I knew there was something happening, and I needed to stay in my little area of the loft for a while he finished that thing, and then I would come out like when I heard the paper stop crinkling and like whatever I associated with that. And it wasn't like he was nodding off or anything. He acted totally normal, but in my opinion, and I really loved him, and he was a very loving, great, wonderful dad. But yes, I would allow him this thing. And I think that's a really interesting, very visceral, like almost gross, I don't mean disgusting, but obvious example of a parentified child, that you actually are letting the drug addict do their drugs before you even understand what a drug addict is.
Well, basically it's when the child feels that their needs are not more important than the parents' needs.
Yes.
And so they don't want they want the love.
Yes.
So you don't want to upset the parents.
But so bolstering that, the flip side was that both of my parents were extremely like tender, and sometimes I call it a lot of somatic love, like lots of hugging, cuddling, sleeping in the same bed. My dad's French and is a nudie like most Frenchmen, and my mother is absolutely comfortable with her body, and she was like somewhat famous for being like that because she was in these Warhol movies in the late 60s and she was often nude in them, and she wasn't playing character, she was just playing herself. So there was a lot of women in my life. My mom's also the oldest of 9, so we would go to this big house way up north near Canada in Thousand Islands, and my aunts would often be naked. I have tons of cousins. They all oddly, even though they grew up like very strict Roman Catholic in Syracuse, they were oddly like all attachment parents, sort of, nursing the kids. I would sometimes take a little nip off one of my aunt's titties,
Wow.
even after I was done weaning. So it was this very
What was the time period of that?
70s. Yeah, so I was born in 71, and my mom nursed me till I was 4, nursed my sister till she was 4, and then all of my aunts, they had each had 3 kids at least. All nursed forever. I mean, maybe not all of them, but most of them. And so I just remember this very tender, loving feeling towards the women, and being held, and they really loved me. And I think because I was so pleasing with adults, they also loved me, and I was one of the first cousins, so I had a lot of you're so wonderful, you're so great. And I guess I was funny back then, so I had a lot of verbal appreciation, from the adults. And the other aspect, and I don't know if this is in the category of a parentified child, but my parents did give me a lot of autonomy and agency. So they would take me out with them, and I would often go to 1 Avenue and with my dad out to dinner, and my mom would bring me all over the place to parties, and we'd travel. And when my sister was born when I was 11, I carried her in, a pack around New York on the subways. So I think that kind of physical agency, and also growing up in Manhattan in the 70s, so different. I loved it, absolutely loved it, never felt scared. Honestly, I think there was not a single point in my born and raised in New York that I felt like maybe a couple of times slightly threatened on the street. And that's supposed to be the most dangerous time in New York, I would say I feel more threatened now, by the wealthy motherfuckers in Tribeca. I find them more threatening than a dude showing me his dick on the subway stairs.
Well,
yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that also. I didn't want to stop you short of what you were saying, though.
About your body.
Okay, so I guess, so I don't know, I'm sort of talking aloud with you both now. All I can say, and probably some is genetic, who the hell knows, you know what I mean? Maybe some of us are just born, but there was a feeling of that, I remember, for a very early age, feeling very comfortable, to the point where sometimes I'd make other people uncomfortable. I'd take off my clothes and do what I call pee like a man, off the edge of the dock. But I also knew that people kind of liked it. I'd always get laughs or oh, that's amazing. So even the teenage years when a lot of kids get, don't want to show their bodies, I never had that. I would still walk around naked, and Gaby, I think, is like that too, my sister. I think this is true, and I'm not sure, that I will say that no matter how fucked up the parenting is on paper, if there's a feeling of love during,
those formative
formative years, so birth through those up to puberty, I think a lot of shit could go down and you're going to be somewhat okay,
Definitely.
you could,
There's something, we were talking about this coming down in the car, like just what a revolution is happening right now in, as bad as it is right now in so many ways. It's so dark and so difficult in the society. And I think everyone kind of understands what that's about. But there's also amazing revolutions happening and a dismantling of patriarchy and a dismantling of Western civilization.
Definitely.
Yes,
like the so-called cliche hippie values have all proven to be true. If we just think about the environment and simply pesticides, you know what I'm saying? Like the hippies were already on that in the late 60s. And then it got, so everything they said is actually what is now returning.
Yeah.
And
I
think when you say
that to like our clothing and everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's exactly actually what it was like growing up in the Chelsea Hotel, which is another one of those things like on paper, a lot of people are like, that must have been insane and like dangerous because there was, drug addicts and cops would come in a lot and, hookers. But it actually was like the most tender community. We didn't lock our door most of the time. I would go dancing at Nell's when I was like 14, walk home, at 1 a.m. I mean, 12, Mom. And I feel like I talked to my mom the whole time. And the doorman who was there when my mom was in labor in the lobby, Jerry, would say, "Hey, Alex, how you doing? Did you have a good time?" And of course, the community would drive me crazy sometimes, and we would argue with the community, but it was still really felt that way, And moving to Philadelphia, and by the way, I don't know if you're going to keep that beginning part in, but yes, it does feel like Mount Airy does feel like the suburbs, but it actually is part of the city. But the suburbs are basically right there, But I do, as a New Yorker, I did feel like this was the suburbs. I get this city more, so now I understand why it's the city. And one of the reasons why it really isn't the suburbs is because you're actually like right next to pretty intense, like sprawling city poverty, and it's so much more in that sense eye-opening than living in New York because it's very much more visible how fucked up this country is and the wealth inequality. But I totally got distracted. What I was going to say is I do notice, so I went to public school in New York, and my daughter for the first part of her schooling went to public school before we moved here, and we switched over to private school here, and it's so sheltered, and I really see that, and to a detriment. Like, it makes me sad sometimes. Like, I'm glad Louie had that time at PS3 in New York because she brings that here, and it's weird. You see how people react to that. They love Louie. They're like, God, Louie's so comfortable with herself, and so they're and
Louie's your daughter.
Yeah, sorry, Louie's my daughter who's about to be 15, and she's often recognized for this other element, and I do think it's some of this agency that she had, totally privileged, of course, like, we got a lucky little cheap place in the West Village. So, definitely a product of privilege to have that. But she was going to the deli, when she was 10, by herself. And here, people are sometimes shocked that we let her ride the bus, just when she was in whatever, 8th grade or something, And the money, I think that wealth is such, can be such a disease and such a repression for embodiment. Weird. And I know that sounds weird, but I really see that. Like, you can see it all over the world. Like, poor nations, and this is definitely a generalization and somewhat of a cliche, but I think there's a lot of truth to that, are more embodied. Like, we look at that, like working in a communal backyard, cooking over the fire with one child hanging off the boob, another child wrapped on your back. Like, that's just technically an embodied situation, right? And wealth, as we were saying, it separates and isolates and creates, these bubbles.
Here's money to take care of things instead of actually your aunt or your cousin helping you or your grandparent or and then when you have all of that around you, there's so much else that comes with that. Like, you're with older people.
Yes.
So you're not living in this. You're not living in.
way.
Yeah, you're not living in this ageist way where you don't know an older person and what they have to say.
Not to mention plastic surgery. I mean, it's, we learn, I know I'm speaking to the choir, but our
speak to the choir.
Okay, should I? Okay,
Yeah.
because
We love it.
Empathy is learned through the child's observing. And this is what I remember, like nursing and looking at my mother's face while I nursed and watching her eyes and her forehead and like touching her throat, and also with my aunts.
You remember that?
I really do. Yeah, well,
That's
also because
amazing.
I kind of took some nips off later. You know what I mean? I was
right,
older from my
later.
aunt. So I guess it's really my aunt's stuff. But I feel, here's the thing though, and this will get us to a different subject, but my dad videotaped everything. So
So you
I
can remember
have
it,
this
like-
thing where I call them video memories, and I
Right.
watched them when I was a kid. He was like a diaristic video artist. And so I saw that happening a lot. So sometimes I don't know if I remember.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
It's
saying?
okay.
Yeah. So it's a little weird. So empathy is learned through children prelingual, right? You haven't codified your thoughts, which is language, right? And by the micro expressions on the mother, and I'm putting quotes around the mother. It could be the father. I'm just using mother as an archetypal term. So if you were a dad, two dads, you nurse your child in a different way, right? If you were a mom who couldn't nurse, you're still nursing your child. So I don't want anyone to think it has to be
No, it's
nipple
a
and mouth.
moment where
Yes.
you're face to face.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you see the micro expressions, and micro is the important term, and then you internalize that and learn to read faces, which teaches empathy. Oh, I know, sorry, you mirror it. You start to mirror the micro expressions, and in the mirroring, which is also like a improv technique, right? In the mirroring, you then start to feel it, right? Which is like classic kind of Stanislavski acting method, Like that's how you actually feel the thing. So if we do freeze the face from something as subtle, because now Botox, I guess, is like considered no big deal. Actually, people are gaining less empathy.
Right.
So we're becoming a less
Whoa.
empathetic nation. Yeah, and that's not my theory. Like that's been written about. You can look it up, people.
That's mind blowing.
It's kind of intense,
That's
right? So
scary.
then think about sleep training your children at 4 months old, then injecting your face with Botox.
I love to look at a real face. I love
Yes.
faces.
Me too.
And
Aging faces are so beautiful. And I think
Yeah.
it's so weird that we decided, like, and it comes so early. My son, I think there's a certain kind of instinctual, like almost, primordial thing where children are a little afraid of aging. And I don't know if it's worse because they don't get to see it as much now. I'm not actually sure. But I think my son, my 7-year-old contemplates death a lot. So like he said to my husband the other day, I'm going to miss you so much when you pass. And and he'll take my hand skin and go, are you old? And he'll compare it to grandma's and stuff. I think that's a natural, organic way of like figuring out death,
and,
and it's healthy, and we need to
They have a
contemplate
lot of
death and all
fears
that.
of
Yes.
that, yeah.
Or even just interest, like what? We're going to die?
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's amazing. And
It's
because
important to
I'm
talk
really
about.
into looking at death, So I do think that the fear of aging, well, I'm not saying anything that big deal, it's quite obvious, is the fear of death, right?
yes.
So it's, total fear of looking into the abyss, and as we age, that means we're getting closer to death, right? So it's pretty like banal base fear that we're trying to stop. But and then I do find that that's another issue, like the births being hidden and deaths being hidden, and that exacerbates the fear of aging. Because once we get kind of comfortable with death, we're going to get more comfortable with aging. And
Totally.
and like that's a cool thing, and it only, which is the precept of all yoga. And when I say yoga, I don't mean downward dog and vinyasa yoga. I mean actual yoga is expanding in the now, and so what yoga says is the only way to expand in the now is to look death in the eye, because then we're comfortable with change.
Right.
So,
And,
yeah.
and it's also in Buddhism too, like just
Yeah.
that the way to, it's a real release of anxiety and fear to face death, like
Yes.
in meditation.
Yes, I find that. And sometimes I kind of can trigger people sometimes in class, because I'll, make some get into death. Generally it goes over okay, but sometimes I might go, or just my family members, I'll be like, if I die when I'm gone, I want you to know I live in your heart. And my daughter will be like, Mom, shut the fuck up. Like, why are you saying that? I'm like, well, it's possible,
Because if we
but I
don't-
like to get there with people, even though I, of course, like any superficial things, I'll be like, ugh, this armpit skin is, why does that armpit skin like that? Or, you know, I wish I took a picture of my belly before that second kid. It was so rad and I didn't appreciate it. But yet at the same time, when I look at pictures of me younger, I actually think I'm more beautiful now. Like, and I truly feel that way. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Not saying that to be weird. And I actually really love my wrinkles. I mean, I know older people might be like, wait till you're 80 or something, but I do kind of feel like I'm going to be okay with it. I like to see how I feel on the inside and then really try to look, wait, what do I really look like? Like just walking down the street, like I'll be like, oh wow, no, I look like I'm in my late 40s. Like, wow, I've got all these little wrinkles up here. Like I'll be staring in the rear view mirror of the car. And just like being there with it, being like, oh yeah, I've got an older face, even though I think I'll like identify with your age and I'll think you and I are the same. I'll be like, yeah, honey, when that and that. And then I'll be like, oh no, right, she's a young woman who men and women are attracted to on the street, and I'm the older lady who's kooky and weird. You know, I'm like, I like to go through all these
personas. Except you are, like, I think, I look at you and I'm like, wow, you are incredibly sexy and hot and beautiful because of your, the comfort that you have. It's like, whoa, makes me be
polyamorous at all? I heard it's popular these days.
You're funny.
But thank you.
Should we go back to like our first question?
Yeah, we got sidetracked. Yes.
Have we finished the dance on the show body?
I will say one thing about that.
I could watch it on
It does
repeat.
annoy me a little bit that some people will be like, oh, you just played yourself. And I do want to be like, fuck you, try playing yourself, you know? That's hard. Like, you know what I mean? So I've had people be like, oh, I saw that. And I was like, oh, there's Alex doing her thing. And I kind of want to say, don't say that because that's actually more difficult.
I think it's the hardest thing to play yourself.
So I should get the Emmy for that performance.
You should.
I'm kidding. But it was truly an incredible experience.
Yeah, was that?
And thank God we have people like Ben and Katya who actually recognize those skills or abilities in people and make a platform for that. It's so great. I honestly felt like, because I really love acting, but I don't want to do like weird commercials. They'll play the middle-aged lady on some law show. Not that I could get that part, but you know. And when I did that and them letting me go to the place I went to, I was like, okay, cool, I can be done. Like, I actually felt like if that's what I leave, you know, once I die, I'm cool with that. You know?
Can we, I mean, maybe for the listeners who haven't seen it yet, can you explain a little bit about what that performance was?
Oh, it's I don't know, I want to say the 9th episode of the 2nd season of High Maintenance, and I'm the same character, Gloria, who was in the 1st season, but with a much smaller part, a yoga teacher. And I'm trying to break the world record for dancing. So I'm doing a self kind of made dance marathon. And I actually thought of it like labor. So, I mean, that was my own personal motivation. So I invite people over and we're having it starts as a party to support me. And I don't know, I want to say it's like 4 or 5 days of dancing straight. You can't stop dancing to break the record. And then it slowly devolves into, you'll have to see the episode. But if you watch that episode or see it again, that is how I thought of as child labor. As I don't mean to say children working. I mean giving birth to children. Right. I had home births, and so it's kind of like almost a home birth gone awry. Right. But I went there when some of the things were happening. You know,
is that how you managed? You mean as you were acting? That's
yes. Like I actually was pretending I was in labor. So like when I'm hanging over the chair, sometimes I'm doing labor contractions. Right. I mean, in my own head. Right. You know what I mean?
How long was that like filming that?
It was one day. It was a little bit of a Forrest Gump situation because honestly, Ben and Katya didn't tell me. It was like a few days before we shot, and there was a funny thing where they had my wrong email. So I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And they didn't really tell me. And I was kind of like, wow, I'm getting a lot of attention today while we're shooting. I'm not having many breaks. And I was like, this is getting a little tiring. Like, they need me again. They'd be like, let's get her back. And, you know, and they're slowly getting my, like, zombie-ish makeup on. Yeah. And I was kind of like, Jesus, you know, could I get a break here? Like, this is kind of crazy. And then the producer started walking with me. He was like, thank you so much for doing this. And I was like, why all this attention to me? I don't know. And then it slowly dawned on me. I was like, oh, this is my part of the episode. I am the star of this episode. I was like, oh. And then I was like, okay. And it was literally like that. Like that's how kind of fly by the night it was.
That's awesome.
And
I love that.
I'm slightly exaggerating, yeah. But so the intense part we shot the next day, it was only 2 days of shooting, and I was a little nervous, I will say, the first day, and I called my sister. This will round our subject up, I think. And I was like, I don't know, like, I'm not sure what's going on with this. Like, my ass is out there a lot. I feel almost like crying, I said, like at the end of the first day. Like, not like from shameful, but just not knowing if it was right or how far I should go with it.
Vulnerable.
Yes, I felt vulnerable and weird. And she was like, did you guys see Crystal Fairy, that movie of my sister's? It's really amazing. Make sure to watch that. It's really good. Crystal Fairy and the Magic Cactus. I might be saying that.
But I am remembering when she was giving birth on girls, and that was pretty epic.
Yeah, that's so good. I know. I forgot why I was saying that. I called her, and she gave me a pep talk. It was like one of those like sports movies, but for women getting naked on film. Like a football coach giving, and she was like, you trust Ben and Conchoretta. I was like, right. She's like, they chose you for this because this is what you do. She was like, have fun. They're going to make it look fine. Be in it, embody, just really go with it, have fun being yourself. And so the next day is when most of that kind of really wild stuff was shot, and I really had fun with it. And,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So inspiring. And then how did you feel when you were done? Like, did the vulnerability
second
did you have a
day,
vulnerability
so good,
hangover?
because I feel like, no, the first day, yes, when I woke up, I was like, oh God, I think something about getting to the real spot the second day where I really kind of didn't worry about anything. There was also a lot less people there, and Ben was more relaxed. And, we've talked about this since then, and he agrees with that. Like, it was a little nervous the first day, and there was a lot more extras. You kind of know inside. Yeah, exactly. It was a big party. When... we all know when we're getting to a real place, you know? And so I felt really good at the end. I still, I don't know what the hell they're going to do with that, or if I'm going to look absolutely heinous, but I kind of didn't care,
That's cool.
And there was, definitely, I'll admit, a moment when I saw it where there was, a lot of, cellulite ass and thighs, and I was like, oh, I noticed, I was like, would have liked to be more in shape for that, but... Well.
No, it's
But that level of vulnerability really comes through, and it really touches you.
Oh, I'm so glad.
In such a way that I think that there is nothing wrong with any of it.
Good.
Oh my God, good. The opposite.
Good.
So I mean that must be. But I do very much empathize with how hard that must be to put yourself out there.
Hard, and also felt really lucky, and this because I do at the end of the day, I'm an exhibitionist, you know what I'm saying? So you do sometimes need a platform for that. And so that's what I mean. I was like, thank you for letting me be an exhibitionist, Sometimes if I'm stoned with a group of good friends and I'm going on some riff, I will be like, this should be filmed, honey, And so I was like, great, got some of that on. And, my big...
Someone's validating and recognizing.
Yes, and I don't know if you... know this, but I mentioned Colin Farrell in the episode, and I'm referring to his sex tape, and it's a common story I tell because I didn't give a shit about Colin Farrell before I saw the sex tape. The sex tape's old, you can just Google it and see it, and he's a pussy whisperer.
What does
Colin
that mean?
Farrell. He kneels down. The woman who he's having sex with is a pussy loather. She really doesn't like her own pussy. This is great for our body positivity subject. And she's like, oh no, it's unattractive. Oh, I don't like it. And he's like, oh baby, no, baby. He's like, it's so gorgeous. And he's talking to the pussy, and he's like, oh my God. He's like, it's gorgeous. No, stop. And she's like, I don't know. And then, so there's this point where she's filming him, and he kneels down, and he's gesturing to the puss, and he goes, right here, baby. Oh, fuck yeah. Breakfast, lunch, and fucking dinner. And then he just starts going at it. And I was like, oh my God, Colin Farrell, I love you so much. And now, so I whisper his name, and my dream is
that he sees it.
Yes.
And then you guys have sex.
Yes, in the next season.
Oh.
So that was the other reason why I felt I could die after doing that episode, because I said it to the world. But you only know it if you really hear it. Yes, yes. So when I'm singing, I don't want to get to, but a certain thing, you'll notice it. I'm singing to Colin Farrell.
If you're enjoying what you're hearing, please subscribe and give us a good rating so the powers that be can keep this podcast going.
We haven't gotten to our first interview
it?
question,
Okay.
which is just, what are you feeling excited about in your life right now?
Doing more, creative work. Like my yoga teaching, I love, and it's like natural for me. And it definitely gives me a sense of satisfaction these days, but I never really intended to be a yoga teacher. Like that was a side job that I just ended up now being for 25 years, So yes, more stuff working with people like Ben, with my husband, who's a filmmaker. I also, try to write little things. And actually I am excited about my little videos I make on Instagram. Like I feel like it is really a way to
express yourself,
say things that I want to say. It's so hard to talk about the things even in a podcast style because I'm always worried, there's a mom that's going to feel bad because she's a nurse, or there's someone who now feels bad about themselves because they do Botox, And I don't want women to feel like that. But I do get flack. So for the videos, I feel like I can use humor.
So what is what is the point of view that you feel that you find satisfaction and fulfillment out of expressing through your social media about yoga? Like, because I think it's, but I love it. I actually see it, given the fact that we're not in your yoga community, we don't know any of these people. To me, I see it as actually the opposite, is actually a way to bring more people into yoga, because I think there are a lot of people that probably feel alienated by the stereotypical spiritual type of yoga. I don't know. Intimidated. I'm not this hippie woman that can be whatever.
It's its own. It's become yoga. I mean, I can say that I started teaching yoga when it all really first sort of started to get really big, in the early 90s.
Yeah.
I feel like yoga too has become like everything else, very commodified, intimidating. It's become its own intimidating fashion beauty kind of thing, where you have to have a certain body
and wear Lululemon.
There's a certain stereotype that's attached to it now.
There's things I'm truly offended and find reprehensible about things that are going on in what I call the neo-spiritual and neoliberal world. And to me, they really mesh together. And so, I believe in a socialistic democracy, democratic socialism, politically, and I was a Bernie Sanders supporter fervently. I found that the identity politics that happened in the primary between the Hillary and Bernie thing to be extremely isolating, and also felt I almost lost friends from this situation. So again, so much to get into that hard to tackle, right? So I find that that extends into what I'm calling, neoliberal politics, in my opinion, is encapsulated in the kind of true blue Democrat, which the Clintons represent. I voted for Hillary Clinton, by the way, finally, not in the primaries. So I think that neoliberalism is deeply wrapped into what I call the neo-spirituality. And so if you look on Instagram, there's incredible stuff going on out there, but the most, the biggest followers, the biggest influencers are white women of privilege who are suggesting that many ills can be saved by, for example, I happen to hone in onto this doTERRA oil thing. It's just a tool for me to get certain message out. People think I'm against this doTERRA oil. I'm not. I make videos making fun of the conflagration. Is that a word?
Sure. I think it is.
That's not a word, I don't think. But anyways, of the person who represents themselves as a spiritual leader and teacher that's also a saleswoman and is trying to sell products while suggesting that, the precepts of yoga, which are inner transformation and consciousness reveal, that somehow these products like essential frankincense oil is going to elaborate on this. That might be the case for an extremely privileged few. So if you have the space to do a daily meditation every day and set up a little crystal altar with feathers and have the money to buy a set of doTERRA oil and put it on, there's nothing
wrong
to
with
brag.
That.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also nothing to brag about, and because that's easy as fuck, great. You've got a nice space where you can get quiet and put oils on. that means nothing to me in terms of spiritual transformation, you know? And just as I always say, like, if you're a monk, a male monk, great, big deal. You're enlightened. I really don't even think the Dalai Lama deserves any credit. He's been fed by people, clothed by people, picked as a child his whole life. If you did that to me, I'm telling you, I would like be much more evolved than the Dalai Lama right now.
I did have this unbelievable yoga teacher at one point who was so deep and so amazing and so brilliant, who used to say it's easier to be a monk than it is to be a mother.
So some people are like, well, you make money teaching yoga, so how can you criticize it? That's literally like saying you live in America, how can you criticize it? That is what our purpose is to speak our voice, activism. So I can be a part of the yoga world and the commodified yoga world and still criticize it. To me, that's the cult of positivity that's extremely detrimental to what, like in yoga, the most common word for that is viveka, for like intellectual discrimination, you know? So
you mean the emphasis on always having to be positive as some sort of without a critical mind?
And that if you're going to take part in something, one, you don't have the right to criticize it, and that positivity is and support are held as the highest, you know, at the highest pinnacles in this neo-spiritual world. And that is actually quite the opposite of what yoga is about. Yoga is actually about tearing things apart.
Can we hear more about that? More about what yoga is actually about? Because you said earlier downward dog vinyasa versus actual yoga, and I wrote that down because I was like, what do you think actual yoga is?
You know, there's like groups on the internets that argue about this for hours. So I want to say right now, I'm not giving a definition for yoga. It's people literally argue about this. But one thing it is not is the physical shapes. That's 100% for sure. There's like 3 mentions of physical stuff in any of the yoga texts. Only one more specifically in the text that most people use in the yoga world, which are the sutras. You know, there's one mention of asana, and it does not describe a single thing of what we do. The most colloquial definition is like a still and steady seat. So the movements... it's so hard to get into because I when I say it, I also hear people like, that is wrong, and people, you know, but the movements were mostly brought to us, you know, in the last 50 years, mostly influenced by one man, Krishnamacharya, who's an amazing dude. Then his information was disseminated by like 3 other dudes, Patabi Joyce, who's also now being accused, has always been, but it's now more in the public for sexually harassing the students during adjustments. Iyengar, who doesn't have so far any sexual harassment accusations, and Desikachar, whose son actually does, but he hasn't so far. So there's like 3 kind of strains of physical movement that came from there. But yoga itself is a philosophy and practice to discover Sat Chit Ananda, which means existence, knowledge, bliss. So it's tools to explore consciousness. A lot of the tools have to do with stillness and silence, ways to cultivate that stillness and silence to explore consciousness itself. So first, thought has to be explored. So that's like becoming the witness, the sakshi, and exploring the flux of the mind. And then the idea is that through that perspective, through that little distance or space between the observer and the thing being observed, there's a shift in perspective. So that it is possible behaviors could change as you have that little reprieve and relief from feeling reaction that are usually so close together that there's not time, right? We call that like a toddler is very reactive, right? So that's like toddler behavior.
So we're not
feeling
stuck
reaction.
in our stories for our whole
Yeah.
lives.
And then through practices that have to do with there's devotional practices, you know, it comes from India, so it's deeply linked to Hinduism. So there's the Hindu pantheon of gods that are involved, the codification of these practices. So it started before language, and then when language came, it was codified in Sanskrit. So, you know, I think the easiest way to think about it is like, I often say this in class, like the first Neanderthal Homo sapiens who became aware of their breath, they went, wow, and then they sang, right? Like we know that they sang from like the way the molars were, you know, worn down, rather than just functional grunting and groaning, like for survival. So it was like the first realization that breath is consciousness. And then really the next thing was art, right? We found the paintings on the cave walls, and we found artifacts in the the strata of the earth. So if you think about like a saber-toothed tiger trying to kill you, but you somehow were like, this is so incredible that I have to whittle a tiny little miniature silver basket inlaid with pearls. You know, like those are the things they found of the peoples who lived by the oceans. So I would say that's the beginning of yoga, right? How I'm contemplating the power of consciousness that's beyond language, that's beyond linguistics. And then these fast forward to the writing of Sanskrit. So then, you know, all the places in the world, the plains, the oceans, the mountains, the Himalayas, all different people doing this at the same time. These particular people in India were like, wow, I just, you know, I figured out if I sit still for 3 hours and focus on the movement of the diaphragms, they didn't know the name diaphragm back then, but this crazy stuff that's happening in my body called breath, I just discovered that consciousness is this kind of energetic power that's like gravitational waves moving through my body. I'm going to write that down like this, like, and so began the text, you know, like when you sit for this long, you will feel this thing called prana, you know. We know that in physics and science, this is true. They're measuring the gravitational waves from the Big Bang right now in these tunnels called LIGO tunnels, you know? So like they're imperceptible to the human body, but they do go through the human body. So I will say like the early yogis were tuning themselves into the point where you could feel like the gravitational waves that these special tunnels can only register right now, you know?
Wow. I think what you're saying in terms of your going back to your videos and
Yes,
the criticism that you're having is that is that again, it's like yoga has been commodified and identity politics has been commodified, and all of it is being used kind of by, you know, for Instagram followings and for, you know,
also through like true like late stage capitalism, you know,
that's what
like
I mean.
yeah, exactly. So exactly, and so like we are now taking this very crazy mystical thing that I barely understand myself. By the way, if I sound like a know-it-all, I know nothing about it. I'm just like try to articulate in some way or another. Yes, and then whittling it down into some like 1950s commercial message. Meanwhile, my opinion, acting like the modern neo-spiritual 1950s housewives, really, because it's mothers saying like, this is how you make the food for the child perfectly, and if you get this crystal, this feather, and this oil, and you can manage it all yourself, like, you know, and basically do it all, you know, which is a lot of references that my videos have, like pretending to be the woman who can do it all, which I'm kind of riffing from the, you know, that 80s commercial Angeli perfume, you know. I bring home the bacon, I fry it up in a pan. Never, never, never let you forget you're a man. You know what I'm talking about? You're too young. Yeah, you can look it up. You'll see it. But then, okay, so that's one thing, right? Some of it's just pure. I just think it's hysterical and, you know, I just like to make fun of it. I'm just sarcastic and obscene, and I'll make fun of it. The other thing is I find it racially charged, which is going to trigger a lot of people, because if you put any of these new age aphorisms or platitudes and then add, if you're right, they all work perfectly. One door opens when another door closes. If you're white, just do that to any of them. It works. You know what I'm saying? Like, think about this right now. Like, imagine the lady on Instagram writing, if one door opens, another one closes, or the universe provides, and then going into an immigration cage where there's children without their parents sitting and telling that to the children.
Right.
That's absolutely inapplicable and fucked up. So I like to know that whatever I say is going to sit okay with a lot of different people, right?
I mean, as a teacher.
Yes, as a teacher. And I find it very irresponsible to be sending these messages out which are simply not true, economically untrue. You can't, this idea of abundance, people hashtag abundance and say that like money is energy, that is, in my opinion, offensive and irresponsible and actually white supremacist behavior, because it's absolutely not abundant. And there's 6 white males who own everything. I don't know the number, but it's everything, basically the combined wealth of the West of the world. And no matter how people shift their minds or their intellect through meditation, that's not going to change that shit. It's changed through activism, politics, and in my opinion, moving towards socialism with a democratic
right. And can I just add to that? I just want to add to that and what makes it particularly scary is the additional factor of outrage culture and identity politics and people not being able to speak freely without being eviscerated.
Yes.
Like
yes.
you add that on top of it, and then we are set up for totalitarian society.
Yes. I believe in correct language when we're talking about people of color and women. You know, like I had to learn myself about how to speak about things. And I will say that social media helped me with that. Certain groups I'm in on Facebook.
Some of the discomfort is helpful because it forces you to.
No, but I just want to
absolutely.
clarify
And I know
myself.
you're not talking about
No, but
that.
what I'm saying is for people that want to learn, like yes, we all have to correct, we all have to change, we have to learn, but we have to do it together. We have to learn from each other. We have to speak to each other.
Yes, and I think that's true, but I think there is going to be this time, which we're in now, where it's going to be, you know, like the men are saying, this feels like a witch hunt with the Me Too movement. And I think that it's kind of got to go through this intensity, and I, you know, definitely step back from commenting certain things. Sometimes I can't help myself on social media. I'm just going to like make a trolly comment. I just can't. I have to like sit on my hands and I can't look at it if I've had any tequila, you know. But sometimes I just let myself make a fucked up comment to people. But I do think that we have to kind of move through this pain of such sensitivity, because I have a lot of issues with certain things that happened and are happening in the Me Too movement, but also I think it has to happen.
What is the biggest risk you've ever taken in your life? Oh. Or a risk you feel?
Yeah. Well, I would say the first thing that comes to me is homebirth. Just like going into that arena, and I loved it and did it twice, but I felt, especially at the time when I had my first child, like, you know, I have like gynecologists, older male friends who called me and said I'd kill the baby, you know, so it felt like risky in the, you know, 15 years ago, and now it's not quite as much anymore. I mean, people are more used to it, and it's something I'd wanted to do my whole life, so I feel like that was a risk I took, having my first baby at home with friends and having a life-changing experience of labor. That is one of those things that I just, like, great, I've done that, I loved it, that was incredible, it was a risk I took, I'm glad I did it. Maybe I could say a risk I took was being a yoga teacher and not, you know, trying to make more money. Not that I, you know, I'm saying that wasn't a plan, but I'm like, yeah, that was a kind of risky life choice, like to be kind of always a little bit precarious financially, but feel actually pretty good inside, you know.
Right. And do you feel like you have any sources of shame?
Oh, shame about ways I've treated my kids, you know, when I've lost my shit. That's the most shameful feeling as a mother, you know, knowing that there was no reason to get that angry, you know, physically manhandling my son when he's taking me to the edge, you know, grabbing his arm, terrible. You know, you just got to like lean into that and work with it and try to find tools to be better the next time. Definitely shame after drinking too much tequila and, you know, acting more like myself, which can be a little annoying for people. I can get very like politically angry. I walked out of the 9th grade potluck not that long ago because the host told me they were a fiscal conservative but socially liberal, and I just walked out. And now it's like going around the school and people hate me. Yeah, that kind of thing.
How do you deal with when people being you speak your mind and being disliked?
Yeah, usually I would write an email and be like, I'm so sorry, like that it was the tequila speaking. This time I decided to just be okay with that, and like I know that there was a couple of people that really hate me right now, and I'm just like, that's okay, you know. I felt like I was gonna be fine. I'm sure there's tons of people who hate me, but I'm just saying I'm okay with knowing them and knowing that don't agree with what I did. And it was, you know, it probably wasn't cool to walk out. It was a sweet party with a lovely host. It was just a small thing, but yet I was kind of leaning into maybe not making the right decision, you know, just okay with
like being compassionate.
Yeah. But generally I try to make it better. I'm usually not good with it. And I try to make it better and send like apology notes.
Okay. So what is your definition of self-acceptance? Or how do you think about self-acceptance?
I'm like trying to feel it now myself.
What does it mean?
I mean, so different for everybody, right? For me, I guess, letting go of guilt, whilst still remaining kind, and empathetic. So, when I act unkindly, it gives me guilt, So a way to know when guilt is inappropriate and when guilt is, you might have a little guilt for acting like a jerk, So being able to really suss through that, to see through those layers, and, aging gracefully. And to me, gracefully means owning the age. I feel that's really the most self-acceptance now than ever, as the aging process. Yeah, I would say definitely. If I look back at, the height of my youth beauty, when I think about the things I was annoyed with, it's just so, I just so don't care, I would say like I'm more, yes, that the aging process has helped me to become self-accepting, and maybe they're like a little, work together, like self-accepting helps the aging process.
Right.
I think it means, being a present mother, vulnerability. I mean, it's weird for people who aren't my husband, but it's actually kind of hard for me to be vulnerable, which probably doesn't sound like that, and to be like actually not defensive at all. And that's like definitely my hardest thing. To the outer world, it's easy. To the inner sanctum, super hard for me. So I would say the more I accept myself, the more I'm able to just reveal that vulnerability and tenderness with my partner. Because the partner, I'm just looking at your mom because we have this issue, we can project, or they represent that parental figure. It's when we've been together this long, To me, that would be like the ultimate reveal of self-acceptance, like when I was able to really step into that partnership in that way, which still hasn't happened, So it's something to look forward to.
And say, and is what you're saying, and
that's
be
an
able,
amazing thing to admit,
yes,
as like someone who's been in a marriage for 20 years.
I can say I'm just
haven't.
learning that now.
Yeah.
I feel exactly the same.
Oh yeah,
way.
and constant
like
work
just,
always.
but I just want to clarify,
Yeah.
is what you're saying, that just to be able to admit your vulnerability, admit your need, and not be the baby. Like, it's not the baby crying for the need, but it's the actual adult.
Yes, and be able to
need.
caretake, because oddly enough, that's also harder for me to do in that relationship. So both to be able to ask for things, and to be able to caretake with no feeling of resentment and bitterness, and to love fully, right? Which is, and I feel like it's just 2 steps. It's like the pushing stage in birth. It's like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, Every time I think I've gotten something, then the next day I'm like, oops, foiled again, fucked up.
Right.
I really relate to that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you
so much.
Oh
This
my
was
God,
amazing.
thank you.
Amazing.
Everything and more than I could dream of.
Yes.
Oh, thank you
I feel
so
like
much.
I just gotta endure.
I could go
Nice.
forever.
Good. Fun.
Me too. I love that cult of positivity. Such a good one.
We hit a lot of notes, ladies.
We hope you were inspired by this episode.
Until next week, that's it from me, Elisa.
And me, Lily.
If you agree that facades separate us and being radically honest brings us together, help spread the movement for radical self-acceptance by sharing this episode and subscribing to our podcast.
You can also watch our videos by subscribing to our YouTube channel and following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook using the handle @StyleLikeU.
That's the letter U instead of the word you.
And check out our book, True Style is What's Underneath, The Self-Acceptance Revolution, on Amazon or at a local bookstore near you.
We can't skip ahead to a happy ending or live inside a photoshopped image or an Instagram filter. There's no finding oneself when glossing over the truth.